I knew Julian Mercer was going to be an absolute, unmitigated disaster for our engineering division the very second he referred to my command line terminal interface as adorable during his inaugural executive walkthrough. He uttered the word with the condescending, performative sweetness one might reserve for a rescue kitten, completely oblivious to the fact that those exact custom terminal scripts were the single load-bearing pillar holding our company's high-frequency transaction engine together. Julian strutted into our Monday morning all-hands meeting, looking like a motivational speaker who had gotten lost on his way to an expensive coastal retreat. He wore a tailored designer shirt, an overly aggressive haircut, and a LinkedIn influencer smile that immediately made my back molars ache. He stood at the front of the glass-walled conference room and announced with practiced theatricality that our enterprise was officially entering a brand new era of agility, strategic alignment, and operational velocity. In corporate speech, everyone in the room, over 45, knew exactly what that specific phrasing signaled. It meant someone was going to be terminated before Friday afternoon, and it was almost certainly going to be the senior principal architect who refused to use decorative emojis in Slack status updates or post superficial productivity updates on professional social media platforms. Julian signed every single company-wide communication with the absurd moniker Julian Ascend, a habit so profoundly ridiculous that I spent his first 2 weeks waiting for him to launch a cryptocurrency investment pitch to our engineering staff. He talked incessantly during executive syncs about bringing clarity, synergy, and modern paradigm shifts to our software development lifecycle. Then, on his 4th day in office, he had the sheer audacity to ask if we could immediately sunset the core distributed microservices architecture that I had spent the last 7 years personally designing, stress testing, and optimizing. That legacy foundation Julian wanted to bury in the graveyard of tech debt happened to power 72% of our total enterprise recurring revenue and handled over 40 million daily API calls across 3 continents. I had engineered that system to maintain strict data sharding algorithms, real-time telemetry pipelines, distributed lock management, and transactional database integrity under extreme concurrency. I had built asynchronous worker queues, multi-region failover nodes, and container orchestration frameworks that kept our platform running continuously without a single minute of unscheduled downtime. Now, I do not cry at work. I lost the capacity for workplace tears back in 2008 when our primary server farm in Ohio overheated during a record heat wave, and I had to keep our primary transactional databases online using an industrial floor fan, a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew, and 24 straight hours of emergency assembly patches. But there was something about the way this 33-year-old executive addressed me as "Sir," with a patronizing smirk, while systematically excluding me from strategic architectural roadmaps that lit a slow, furious fuse deep inside my chest. I had spent countless late nights architecting every microservice component, ensuring high availability and fault tolerance. When Raymond and I first laid the technical foundations back in 2016, we were dealing with limited hardware resources and tight budgets. I designed a custom asynchronous message broker using zero-copy memory buffers, integrated an in-memory Redis caching cluster to handle peak query loads, and implemented PostgreSQL database sharding with read replicas across multiple availability zones. I built custom telemetry pipelines that monitored memory allocation, CPU thread contention, and network socket latencies in real time. Every single service container was orchestrated using strict deployment manifests that I had personally written and audited. This was not off-the-shelf software assembled from public tutorials. It was a highly specialized, proprietary enterprise engine crafted over thousands of hours of intense labor. Before Julian arrived, our engineering culture was rooted in deep technical competence, structural discipline, and mutual professional respect. I had joined the enterprise back in 2016, when we operated out of a cramped co-working basement furnished with cheap folding tables, squeaky office chairs, and leftover whiteboard markers. The original founder, Raymond Miller, was a brilliant visionary engineer who possessed just enough technical foresight and just enough existential panic to realize he needed a seasoned systems architect to build a production-grade back-end. I was 50 years old at the time, bringing over 2 decades of enterprise software engineering experience, having survived the dot-com crash, corporate buyouts, and dozens of incompetent executive reorganizations. Raymond sat across from me over stale diner coffee and asked what it would take to turn his fragile prototype into a resilient, enterprise-grade engine capable of scaling to millions of active users without crashing. I presented him with 3 strict, non-negotiable conditions: absolute architectural autonomy, complete protection from micromanaging executives, and an ironclad legal protection agreement drafted by my personal attorney, Douglas Hayes. Douglas was a brilliant contract litigator who operated under the unyielding philosophy that every corporate partnership eventually devolves into executive greed, corporate betrayal, and equity dilution. Douglas had spent 30 years litigating intellectual property theft, trade secret misappropriation, and non-compete disputes in federal courtrooms across Ohio and California. He had seen countless technical founders and lead engineers get pushed out by venture capitalists the second the product achieved market stability. While Raymond was busy dreaming about upcoming series funding rounds and venture capital valuations, Douglas quietly inserted Clause 14.2 into my original employment agreement. It was placed deep within Section 14 under miscellaneous intellectual property provisions. The contract explicitly stipulated that in the event the principal engineer was terminated without a minimum of 90 days written notice, all intellectual property, proprietary algorithms, custom microservices, database schemas, and system architecture developed by the employee during their tenure would immediately revert to the exclusive personal ownership of the employee. Raymond, eager to secure my technical leadership and entirely unconcerned with legal fine print, signed the document without a second thought. For 7 consecutive years, that contract sat quietly inside an archived legal file, patient, silent, and waiting for the right moment. During those 7 years, I built a massive empire of clean, resilient software architecture. I personally authored over 2,300 individual Git commits, built our proprietary high-throughput message queue, stabilized our third-party payment processing pipelines, and authored the automated failover protocols that saved the enterprise when our previous chief technology officer suffered a panic attack mid-launch and vanished without warning. I scaled the company from 0 paying accounts to tens of millions of dollars in recurring annual revenue. But to Julian Mercer, none of that historical engineering achievement carried any weight. To Julian, software development was not about mathematical precision, thread safety, or system uptime. It was about corporate presentation, personal branding, and theatrical optics. Julian believed that Git commit logs were optional, that automated unit testing was an emotional safety net for timid old men, and that glossy slide decks counted as production technical specifications. He insisted on introducing daily burn-down metrics, demanding that senior staff present slide decks for simple bug fixes, complaining that our dark mode terminal interfaces looked gloomy, and attempting to force senior engineers to adopt corporate buzzwords in daily conversation. Douglas had warned me years ago about the deceptive nature of executive promises in fast-growing technology companies. He told me that venture capitalists and ambitious executives frequently view senior technical staff as scaffolding, essential while building the platform but easily discarded once the revenue stream stabilizes. Douglas explained that stock options and equity promises could be diluted or canceled through corporate restructuring, but a properly drafted intellectual property reversion clause creates an absolute legal barrier that no corporate maneuver can bypass. He made sure Clause 14.2 was drafted with razor-sharp legal precision, establishing an explicit condition precedent that tied the company's operating license directly to my continued employment or a mandatory 90-day written notice period. Within his first month on the job, Julian began enacting aggressive operational overhauls without consulting our senior technical staff. He renamed our daily engineering stand-ups to the war room, halved our mandatory code review windows, and forced the installation of an unverified artificial intelligence pair programming plugin that cost $2,200 a month while constantly suggesting severe memory leak vulnerabilities. He began referring to me around the executive suite as the legacy whisperer. He delivered the phrase with a condescending chuckle during management meetings, treating me like an ancient piece of hardware that everyone felt vaguely guilty about replacing. Worse still, Julian began pulling my junior developers, Toby and Caleb, into private one-on-one coaching sessions. He claimed he was mentoring them toward modern engineering relevance, which was simply corporate speak for extracting institutional knowledge while sowing seeds of division. Toby would emerge from those sessions looking pale and anxious, stammering that Julian thought our internal memory locking logic was too conservative for a high-velocity startup environment. Julian even suggested hiring cheap offshore contractors to replace our internal core engineering leads, claiming that modern cloud tools made senior architectural experience unnecessary. Gradually, my corporate calendar began to dry up completely. Invites to high-level product strategy meetings stopped arriving in my inbox. Product managers who used to visit my desk for architectural guidance suddenly grew quiet and distant, terrified that being associated with the senior principal architect would derail their career prospects under Julian's new regime. Julian launched a private Slack channel titled Innovation Hub and intentionally omitted the lead architect who owned the underlying platform. He regularly posted long, self-congratulatory essays in public announcement channels, attaching screenshots of legacy user interfaces from 5 years ago, captioned with arrogant reminders that it was time to evolve or step aside. He even distributed mandatory workplace surveys asking employees if they felt our technological direction reflected modern velocity, structuring the questions to highlight legacy systems as organizational bottlenecks. I sat at my workstation, observing the political maneuvering with the calm, calculated detachment of a master chess player who already sees every move leading to checkmate. Then came the internal technical audits, which Julian grandly branded as transparency sprints. He assigned 2 newly hired junior analysts who barely understood the difference between a pointer reference and a heap allocation to audit my core code repositories. They navigated through my architectural designs using a checklist generated by a basic online text generator and a massive caffeine crash. During one audit review session, Caleb flagged a complex loop inside our core transaction processing pipeline, categorizing it as redundant code that was slowing down execution speed. He did not possess the technical foundation to realize that the loop was a custom recursive sanity check I had constructed to prevent subtle race conditions during high-volume database writes, a critical safety barrier that Julian's new analytics plugin would have triggered like a landmine. I did not debate the issue. I did not raise my voice, display frustration, or attempt to educate them on distributed systems theory. I simply smiled, took detailed notes, documented their mistakes, and saved every single piece of correspondence. Every evening before leaving the corporate office, I executed a rigorous, disciplined archival procedure. I maintained a private Git fork stored on an encrypted physical drive, complete with cryptographic SHA-256 timestamps, line-by-line diffs, Jira ticket resolution logs, and internal documentation edits. I exported complete server access logs and captured time-stamped diffs of microservice configurations. I preserved every single Slack conversation where Julian dismissed my technical warnings regarding system stability. I even captured a pristine high-definition screen recording of an executive investor call where Julian presented my proprietary data caching engine to prospective board members, claiming full credit for its creation as if he had drafted the complex algorithm on a napkin over weekend brunch. I stored immutable backup copies across 3 offline hardware key vaults. Julian foolishly believed he was isolating me, slowly pushing me toward voluntary retirement. He failed to realize that while he was rearranging the furniture, I was carefully documenting every load-bearing beam holding up the ceiling. One evening at 2:17 in the morning, while conducting a routine audit of my personal archives, I brought up my original employment agreement from 2016. I carefully reviewed Clause 14.2, highlighting its precise legal verbiage in bright neon yellow. I drafted an email to my personal attorney, Douglas Hayes, attaching the original signed PDF alongside a complete inventory of our production codebase commits. I titled the email subject line, Verification of Enforcement Clause 14.2. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Douglas responded with characteristic legal sharpness. You have them completely trapped in an inescapable legal corner. Just say the word when you want me to pull the trigger on this corporate circus. Douglas explained that under contract law, an express condition precedent regarding notice failure creates an automatic forfeiture of license rights. I stared at the bright monitor screen for several minutes. I felt no wild rage, no impulsive urge for revenge, only the cold mathematical certainty of a senior engineer preparing to execute an overdue system wipe. The termination occurred on a Friday afternoon. Corporate executives invariably choose Friday afternoons for firing staff because they naively believe the weekend acts as a natural cooling period against legal action and workplace disruption. Julian summoned me to an unscheduled Zoom conference at 4:15. He was reclining comfortably in his executive ergonomic chair, casually sipping an iced beverage from a giant hydro flask, grinning like a used car salesman who had just managed to offload a flooded vehicle onto an unsuspecting buyer. He adjusted his desktop microphone with obvious arrogance and launched into a long, rehearsed speech filled with corporate buzzwords. He spoke at length about strategic alignment, next-generation operational synergy, and the unavoidable necessity of retiring legacy scaffolding to maximize corporate velocity. He talked for 10 straight minutes about how modern engineering teams needed to be lean, unburdened by old philosophies, and aligned with market-driven innovation. I sat in complete silence, watching him monologue through the laptop display. He spoke with the unearned authority of a man who had skimmed half a leadership book during a layover and declared himself a visionary executive. Then, Julian delivered the fatal punchline. He casually announced that as of 5 o'clock that evening, my professional services were no longer required by the company. He leaned closer to his web camera, let out a sharp, condescending laugh, and said, "But hey, do not stress about it too much. Your fingerprints are all over our early foundation. I mean, at the end of the day, all your ideas belong to us now anyway, right?" He did not include an HR representative on the conference call, nor did he provide formal severance documentation. 15 minutes later, he revoked my corporate email credentials and sent a brief Slack direct message wishing me good vibes on my next career adventure, ending the message with his pretentious Julian Ascend sign-off. I did not slam my laptop screen down. I did not send explosive messages to my engineering team or post emotional rants on corporate networking sites. I quietly packed my personal belongings into a canvas bag, stepped out of the glass tower, and took a long, reflective walk through the freezing afternoon air. The Ohio sky hung low and heavy with dark clouds, reflecting the quiet stillness of an approaching winter storm. When I arrived home, I poured myself 2 fingers of straight bourbon, sat down at my personal workstation, and opened a fresh document editor. I printed out a hard copy of my contract, drew a thick red circle around Clause 14.2, and drafted a comprehensive legal summary. I attached our complete Git commit history, system architecture schematics, deployment logs, and Julian's recorded Zoom statements. I transmitted the entire package to Douglas Hayes with a concise instruction: initiate full intellectual property reversion. Issue the cease and desist immediately, and hit them with an invoice that will make the board choke on their morning coffee. At 9 minutes past 9 on Monday morning, Douglas dispatched our legal payload via certified mail, hand delivery, and encrypted digital transmission to the company's general counsel, the board of directors, and Julian Mercer personally. The document was not a gentle negotiation request. It was a devastating legal weapon built on contract law. It explicitly cited Clause 14.2 of the 2016 Employment Agreement, formally notifying the board that due to the material breach of terminating the principal architect without 90 days written notice, 100% of all intellectual property rights to the core software platform had officially reverted to my personal ownership. The legal notice cited federal statutory protections under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, governing exclusive copyright controls, as well as Section 504, regarding statutory monetary damages for willful infringement. Furthermore, Douglas invoked the Defend Trade Secrets Act under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1836, alongside the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act under Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101 for statutory notice failure and cited Restatement Second of Agency. Section 387 regarding executive breach of duty. The legal notice dispatched by Douglas was meticulously constructed to dismantle any defense the company's corporate legal team might attempt to mount. By citing Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106 and Section 504, Douglas established that every single API request processed by the platform post-termination constituted an intentional, unauthorized reproduction of copyrighted source code, exposing the organization to statutory damages of up to $150,000 per willful infringement. Furthermore, by invoking the Defend Trade Secrets Act under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1836, Douglas made it clear to the board that we were prepared to seek an emergency ex parte federal seizure order against their cloud infrastructure servers if commercial exploitation continued. Attached to the legal notification was itemized invoice number 11,822. Douglas did not round the monetary figures, as round numbers imply flexibility in settlement negotiations. The invoice demanded exactly $2,427,910.46. This total was meticulously calculated based on historical enterprise software licensing benchmarks, retroactive development compensation, unauthorized commercial exploitation damages, and a severe non-compliance penalty. The cover letter clearly warned that while the enterprise could maintain temporary access to the production stack under a provisional 30-day emergency license, any attempt to launch their rebranded product using my proprietary assets without settling the invoice would trigger an immediate federal injunction and criminal trade secret complaints. Predictably, Julian Mercer dismissed the legal notice as a desperate, toothless bluff. At 11:24 that morning, he posted a smug announcement in the main Slack channel accompanied by rocket ship emojis, declaring full steam ahead for their upcoming commercial launch. Julian assumed that an ousted senior engineer was simply bitter and angry, attempting to intimidate corporate executives with frivolous legal claims. He believed that the company's corporate legal division would easily dismantle a former employee's contract provisions. Julian failed to grasp one fundamental technical truth. His entire executive reputation, his career, and his upcoming product launch were sitting directly on top of my technical spine. Every microservice, every API routing mechanism, every database index, and every authentication protocol in that repository belonged exclusively to me, and he had just illegally revoked his own operational license. Over the next 48 hours, Julian pushed relentlessly forward with his high-stakes product launch. On Thursday morning at 3 o'clock, during low-traffic deployment hours, his engineering team pushed the rebranded platform live to production. Julian posted a celebratory photograph standing next to the office espresso machine, captioning it with endless hashtags about innovation, disruption, and velocity. But behind the polished user interface, the system was rapidly falling apart. Prior to my departure, I had engineered a highly sophisticated, multi-layered security authentication framework that managed external API access tokens and regulated high-volume database read-write queries. Julian's junior auditors, believing the framework was over-engineered, had completely removed the authentication checks and replaced them with a lightweight script per Julian's direct executive command. I had documented the severe vulnerability of this alteration in 2 separate JIRA tickets, both of which Julian had closed with the note, replaced with lighter solution per executive authority. The lighter solution collapsed catastrophically within 48 hours of commercial deployment. On Saturday morning, the primary system endpoint began generating continuous 403 forbidden errors to our largest enterprise clients. Corporate users were suddenly locked out of their accounts. Data streams suffered corruption mid-transaction, and automated billing modules failed entirely. When database connection pools became completely exhausted, it triggered cascading socket drops, memory stack overflows, and severe database table corruption across our cloud clusters. The automated load balancers began severing active connections, resulting in catastrophic service outages for enterprise financial clients who depended on real-time data feeds. By Sunday afternoon, the customer support channels were completely overwhelmed with furious corporate clients threatening multi-million-dollar breach of contract lawsuits. Julian attempted to manage the disaster on social media, publishing an embarrassing statement claiming the engineering team was investigating minor performance stability issues. Meanwhile, his new lead developer possessed zero understanding of how to debug the recursive sanity checks, resulting in an automated security lockdown that completely froze the core database cluster. By Monday morning, the corporate panic reached the board of directors. Major venture capital investors who had poured tens of millions into the company's expansion strategy began demanding immediate answers. Douglas forwarded me a copy of an urgent internal memo sent by lead venture capitalist Harrison Drake to the executive team. The memo demanded an immediate accounting of all intellectual property ownership rights and ordered a complete freeze on all marketing budgets until the legal ownership disputes were fully resolved. Harrison Drake was not a tech enthusiast who fell for sleek presentations. He was a ruthless corporate financier who understood that if the company did not legally own its underlying source code, its valuation was exactly $0. Financial auditors dispatched by the board confirmed that the core platform had no clean chain of title without my signed licensing agreement. The operational disaster unfolding across our production servers on Saturday evening was the direct technical consequence of Julian's reckless hubris. When his junior engineers stripped away my multi-layered security authentication framework, they unknowingly disabled the rate-limiting algorithms that protected our core database connection pools from starvation. As thousands of enterprise client applications attempted to re-authenticate simultaneously under high traffic loads, the unthrottled queries created catastrophic database deadlocks. Read replicas fell out of synchronization, memory stack buffers overflowed, and active network sockets were abruptly severed across multiple data centers. Enterprise partners operating in global financial markets were suddenly cut off from real-time data feeds, triggering automated error alerts that escalated straight to corporate executive boards across the country. The atmosphere within executive leadership transformed overnight from smug arrogance to absolute terror. Julian stopped hosting daily war room stand-ups and routinely turned his video camera off during emergency executive calls. His loud, booming voice was replaced by a hesitant, stammering whisper. On Wednesday afternoon, the company's general counsel transmitted an urgent communication to Douglas Hayes, opening with warm praise for my historical engineering contributions and requesting an immediate face-to-face settlement meeting to establish a mutually beneficial licensing agreement. Douglas waited exactly 17 minutes before transmitting our response. My client has no interest in licensing negotiations with current technical leadership. Any continued operation of the codebase constitutes willful federal copyright infringement. Desperate to protect his standing, Julian attempted to convene an all-hands meeting to reassure the remaining engineering staff. However, an anonymous employee leaked a full audio recording of the meeting to a prominent technology news outlet. By Thursday morning, major industry publications published detailed articles titled, "Major Enterprise Platform Faces Shutdown," as former principal architect asserts intellectual property ownership under reversion clause. The story exposed Julian's reckless management, the failure to provide 90-day termination notice, the systematic removal of core safety protocols, and the multi-million-dollar legal invoice hanging over the company. The public fallout caused the company's valuation to collapse. While several prospective enterprise clients pulled out of contract negotiations on Friday morning at 8 o'clock, the board of directors convened an extraordinary emergency tribunal. Julian Mercer was not invited to attend or present a defense. By noon, his executive biography was completely erased from the corporate website, his physical access badges revoked, and his employment terminated for gross breach of fiduciary duty under the restatement, second of agencies, section 387. The board recognized that Julian had misled investors regarding asset ownership, placing the entire enterprise in catastrophic legal peril. A brief public release was issued, stating that Julian Mercer had left the organization to pursue other opportunities as part of an operational realignment. That evening, I received a direct telephone call from Harrison Drake, the lead investor. He opened the conversation by offering a sincere, unreserved apology on behalf of the board of directors. He acknowledged that executive leadership had severely mishandled my tenure, placed their trust in the wrong individual, and completely underestimated my foundational value to the business. Harrison offered to reinstate me immediately as Chief Product Officer, proposing a massive salary, extensive equity grants, and complete executive authority over the entire technology division. I listened quietly to his proposal before delivering my strict counteroffer. I informed Harrison that I had zero interest in returning as a traditional corporate employee subject to internal politics and executive interference. I laid out my terms clearly. I would return strictly as an independent principal master consultant. The enterprise would immediately pay revised invoice, number 11,822, which Douglas had updated to include unauthorized post-termination usage fees, security breach liability exposure, investor reputation damages, and bad faith penalties, bringing the final grand total to $4,694,910.46. Furthermore, 100% of all intellectual property would remain under my personal legal ownership. The company would receive a month-to-month revocable license to operate the platform, fully contingent on strict monthly financial compliance payments and my explicit architectural veto power over all code changes. The final master consulting agreement drafted by Douglas was a masterclass in legal leverage and technical supremacy. Under its binding terms, the enterprise paid revised invoice number 11,822 in full, transferring $4,694,910.46 directly into my corporate account. The agreement established that I retained absolute, unencumbered ownership of all current and future source code, while granting the company a strictly conditioned, month-to-month revocable operating license. If the board ever attempted another executive restructuring or violated any architectural directive, I maintained the immediate legal right to terminate their license with 24 hours' notice, instantly locking down their cloud infrastructure. Harrison Drake hesitated for only 3 seconds before accepting every single term without alteration. He recognized that without my technical code and explicit legal authorization, the business was completely insolvent. The legal contracts were drafted by Douglas Hayes, reviewed line by line, and signed by 3 executive board members before the end of the weekend. When I walked back into the corporate headquarters the following Monday, the workplace environment was completely transformed. There were no arrogant speeches, no rocket ship emojis, and no condescending remarks about legacy whisperers. The junior developers looked at me with profound respect, quickly clearing my original executive office and ensuring my technical instructions were executed without delay. I did not rejoin internal corporate Slack channels, nor did I participate in meaningless corporate alignment meetings. I set up my dual monitor workstation, opened my terminal interface, and restored the original security authentication framework, bringing the entire enterprise platform back to absolute operational stability within 3 hours. Julian Mercer vanished from the technology industry entirely, his grand claims of velocity and disruption buried under the heavy weight of his own arrogance. He discovered the hard way that in the world of complex enterprise software, sleek slide decks and corporate buzzwords can never replace foundational engineering and ironclad legal contracts. As I sat in my office watching the system logs stream smoothly across the monitor screen, I pulled out a small printed quote and taped it inside my desk drawer. It read, "When you attempt to fire the engineer who wrote the rules, you had better make sure you own the paper they were written on." Thanks for joining the fun. You office survivors, subscribe for more switch flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.